Welcome to the Big Blue Radio Show, coming to you on Tulsa Community College's online radio station, The Grid, and on the Creativity Channel, Cox Cable Channel 21. I'm Greg Stone, Provost of TCC's Metro Campus in downtown Tulsa.
And I'm Lee Goodson, President of Tulsa Community College. Our guest today is Dr. Cherie Hughes, whose newest book tells us the story of Katherine Drexel, a woman who left a family fortune behind in order to become a nun and who is only the second American saint.
Katherine Drexel has a fascinating Tulsa connection, and we'll hear all about it today with Dr. Cherie Hughes on the Big Blue Radio Show. Well, Cherie Hughes, thanks for joining us on the show today. It's always good to see you, and there's so much to talk about the life of Katherine Drexel, about her family's history, about her work for the church, about her Tulsa connections. So we'll try to get through as much as we can. But I wondered if you would start off and read just a short passage from the introduction to your book, Katherine Drexel, The Rags to Riches Story of an American Catholic Saint. Available, we'll say right off the top, at local bookstores and online.
Yes,
and it's
indeed.
a great, terrific book to read.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here. I always like to talk about Katherine Drexel. This is from the introduction. Katherine Drexel was not born a saint. She worked towards sanctity her entire life, and in her old estimation, fell miserably short of her goal. Her sainthood was the result of a lifelong pursuit of perfection, commanded by Jesus of his disciples. She came into this world with many of its blessings, a large loving family and great material wealth. She was a debutante and an heiress. But these are not what one thinks about when contemplating the essence of a saint. In fact, wealth is more often than not a stumbling block to sanctity. After the encounter with the rich young man who had kept all the commandments but could not give up his possessions to follow Jesus, Jesus remarked to his disciples how hard it will be for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God. Yet Katherine Drexel is recognized by the Catholic Church as a saint in that very kingdom. She became a saint not because of her wealth, but because of her spirit of poverty and stewardship with which she grew in perfection, judiciously dispensing her wealth for the specific spiritual and educational benefit of Native Americans and African Americans, the least of Jesus' brothers in America. She lived into her 97th year. For the last 67 of them, she was known as Mother Katherine Drexel, founder of the Congregation of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament for Indians and colored people. But she was, for 30 years, simply Katie Drexel. The love and charity she would later channel through her religious orders were extensions and amplifications of the lessons she learned from her family.
Cherie, thanks for sharing that. As a bit of an introduction, how did you come to know, I know you talk a little bit about it in the book and the acknowledgments at the end, but talk us through how you discovered Saint Katherine Drexel and what really inspired you to write about her life?
Well, she's somebody I learned about while I was still in college, and it hadn't been that many years since she had died. She died in 1955, and so here I am in the late 60s, taking on the culture along with everybody else. And Katherine Drexel was so countercultural. Everybody else I knew wanted to get rich. She was giving it away. She gave it all away. She never lived up to that. And right there was the kernel of what drew me to her, was that somebody who would go the opposite way when everybody else was going right, she was going left. It was just very fascinating. And it helped that all of her documents for the church were written in English rather than in Latin.
And she's only the second American to be canonized by the church.
That's correct.
And
there are more now, but when she was,
but at the time,
the time of her canonization, she was only the second born American saint.
American saint.
Born here.
And some people might hear the name Drexel and instantly think of Drexel University, and of course, there's a reason for that connection, right?
Sure, that's her family. They established Drexel University. It was actually her uncle who did that. It was a very philanthropic family. They were in the banking business. At one point had the largest banking house on Wall Street, though their main headquarters was in Philadelphia. They eventually had banking houses all the way from Paris to Seattle.
Wow. She grew up in a wealthy family, which is what we've been talking about. And it seems like when you talk about Saint Katherine Drexel, and when we read about her, it was more than just an inspiration for her to go from wealthy to impoverished. It was more than an inspiration. It was almost a drive, which I see as different. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
She was indeed very wealthy when she grew up. Her family, however, despite all that, lived very, very simply. Mm-hmm. Her mother and dad were both very philanthropic. One of the unique things about her mother was that she ran a personal charity out of her back door. It was so many people came to her 2 or 3 times a week. So many people would come, they had to have a policeman there for crowd control.
Wow.
And out of her back door, she would give out money, and people would come and they would ask for shoes or medicine or even rent money. At one point, she was paying more than $30,000 a year in rent for impoverished people in the city of Philadelphia.
So it was a legacy. It was a family legacy, really.
It was a legacy. Her father wrote large checks to big institutions, to hospitals and universities, but her mother's charity was very, very personal. She would meet with these people and talk with them and find out what their problems were, and sometimes even suggest they needed more help. So Katherine's efforts, I think, ultimately were a marriage of that personal and institutional.
When you were reading from the introduction, you mentioned her work specifically with African Americans and Native American peoples, obviously something that was very unusual for her time.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about what drove her to take up that cause and why she felt so compelled and led to minister to those populations of people in particular?
Well, I think she really took the Bible quite seriously, and where it says, you do unto the least of my brothers, you do unto me. And who were the least of her brothers and sisters at that time but Native Americans and African Americans? We weren't very many years off of basically, black freedom and enfranchisement for black men. We were also not very far off of, and this happened within her lifetime, the General Sherman's famous saying that's actually gotten corrupted, and it's probably even apocryphal, but it goes around as, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And I think she felt very responsible, particularly for Native Americans, when she found out what their plight was. She learned that through Bishop O'Connor, who was bishop of the Nebraska diocese, and that took in all the upper Midwest, so all those Native American tribes that were up there. And he took her on a personal tour of his diocese where she visited all these various tribes. And that really started her, that really gave her the direction she was looking for. There were about 600,000 Native Americans at the time. There were about 6 million African Americans at the time. And she felt that the needs of the Native Americans would get lost in the huge need for the African Americans. And so she made both of those quite equally her what's called apostolate. That's what she wanted to do.
And she traveled extensively throughout much of her lifetime. You write in the book about she would spend 6 months out of every year traveling throughout the country to visit members of her order and to provide retreats for them and to encourage them. Again, something that was very out of the ordinary for a woman in the late 19th, early 20th centuries to travel so extensively, and I'm guessing often on her own.
Often on her own. Nuns traveled with a companion,
well.
so there were always 2 of them at least. And she carried what the younger nuns referred to as her poverty bag, and that had her lunch in it, and it was sandwiches and a bottle of water because she would not stop at a restaurant.
Wow.
But yes, she did. She visited all of her schools and missions, and also all those that she had given money to. In some ways, this was the institutional side of her. She was making sure that her father's hard-earned money was spent well in these various missions and schools. And so she checked up on them.
And it was stewardship.
It was stewardship.
Her father's investment, really. We say the word philanthropist, and I think sometimes now we've progressed to the word investment, because philanthropists, it's about giving, but it's also about improving. And so stewarding those philanthropies so that was the role she took on for her father.
I'm glad you said that, the idea about stewardship and investment, because she very clearly writes about education as having an upward spiral effect. That if you educate the individual, you educate their family, and if you educate the family, you educate their community.
Right.
And ultimately, she wanted to see those who came through her schools benefiting their race, and they did. They went on to become teachers and principals and doctors and lawyers and judges. And it was an investment that paid off.
She worked with Native Americans and African Americans, and at the time, the Ku Klux Klan was an entity that she had to deal with in terms of the work that she was doing. How did their activities and movement impact how she did her work, and how did she deal with that?
Well, I would say that they tried to impact it, but they did not. She would not be stopped by anything such as a threat from the Ku Klux Klan. And they were onto her from the very beginning. At the laying of the cornerstone and the dedication of her mother house in outside of Philadelphia, they threatened a bomb.
Wow.
So from the and they burned a cross in the yard. So from the very first, she knew where the enemy was. And as she went into the South more and more, of course, Philadelphia is hardly the South, and the Ku Klux Klan was kind of all over the country. But as she went into the South, she irritated them more and more. And ultimately, in Beaumont, Texas, they beat up and tarred and feathered fathers of students at her school and threatened to blow up the church and the convent. And so what did she do? She hired Pinkerton men to guard the premises, and then she and her sisters gathered and prayed for divine intervention. And whether we call it divine intervention or happenstance, a tornado came and absolutely destroyed the Klan's headquarters in Beaumont, Texas.
That's a great story.
That's a great story, and one to tell.
It is wonderful.
Yeah, that is one to tell.
Well, we just have a few minutes left, but obviously there's an important Tulsa connection to Katherine Drexel's legacy, and I'm wondering if you could talk to us about that. What's her legacy been to the city, and what should Tulsans know about it? Because I'm guessing most people don't know about it.
You're probably right. Most do not. Holy Family Cathedral School, which is a hop and a skip from this building, originally was at 3rd and Elgin. And when it was originally built in 1899, it was built with $1,500 from Katherine Drexel's legacy. And it was called St. Teresa's School for Indian Girls, because that was her mission, to Indian girls or black girls. But at any rate, that was her mission. And so the school was built. And later, when it became Holy Family Parish School, they had to repay the $1,500, because that was always part of her deal. That when it was no longer for her particular mission, then you had to pay it back. After the 1921 race riot, she funded the building of a school for St. Monica's Parish, which is in North Tulsa, and it was her effort to help rebuild the black community after that devastating riot. So yes, she's very important here. She funded all of the Catholic Native American schools in Oklahoma. Many of them started during when it was Indian Territory. Many schools in black townships before statehood. So she's very influential, I think, in the education of Native Americans and African Americans. And I would really like for Tulsans to realize that they had a saint here. Not many cities can say they've had a saint, and she was here all the time. As you said, she visited, Oklahoma. She came through the territory and later the state, and she would stay at the convent right here at Holy Family School.
And especially not many cities in the United States.
No, not many are going to have one, if not, in this case, 2 schools started by a saint. So she's really quite a gem of an individual, and I would love for more people to know about her.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and it's such a great book, and The name of the book again, Katherine Drexel, The Rags to Riches Story of an American Catholic Saint. Thanks for coming in, but we do have one other thing that's not related to
Yes,
Katherine Drexel.
one other question.
To ask you, which is the big question that we ask all of our guests.
And that is, if you were to give advice to your 18-year-old self, knowing what you know now, what would that advice be?
Oh, my. It's probably what I'm still advising students, because I'm still teaching students and my own children, which was to get the broadest education you possibly can. Mm-hmm. Stick with it. Don't ever give up. It's never too late. All those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And to follow your dream.
That's great. Yeah. So many aren't sure what they want to do and need that time for discovery, and to take that time and do that.
I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. I mean, that broad education will not only help them make a living, but give them a life.
Absolutely.
Thank
it's
you.
A great note to end on. That's all the time we have for today, but we do want to thank our guest, Dr. Cherie Hughes, for joining us on the show today.
And thank you for joining us. Remember, you can find us every week online at The Grid, tulsacc.edu/The Grid, and on the Creativity Channel, Cox Cable Channel 21. We'll see you next time.